Did you guys honestly think I'm gonna miss Sonic's 25th anniversary? I mean, granted I haven't been here in a while, but come on, it's my favorite video game franchise, so I gotta celebrate this occasion. And thus, today I'm gonna review Sonic CD for the Sega CD. Yeah, it's safe to say this add-on has been touted as one of the worst of all time because of the majority of its libraries full of FMV shovelware games. But what a lot of people don't know, it actually has a lot of classics that weren't properly marketed. It's a shame because the Sega CD is essentially an upgraded version of the Genesis, but it's only touted as a poor video player, which I think was a totally wrong way to go about this. Sonic CD over here was actually the top seller for the system, being a Sonic game of course, but it really wasn't enough to save the system to begin with. So Sonic CD, how does it hold up? Pretty darn well. But let's figure out exactly why.
After the success of Sonic 1, Yuji Naka, the main programmer, moved over to the US with a bunch of former Sonic team members to work on the sequel Sonic 2. However, in Japan in the meantime, another game was created under the guidance of the original creator of the character, Naoto Oshima. The game that was developed in Japan was a completely different offspring, more commonly known as Sonic CD. The story of the game follows Sonic when he's trying to witness Little Planet, a spherical entity that shows up once a year. However, our favorite rascal Potnik is up again to his old schemes by encasing the planet in a metallic shell. Once again, it's up to Sonic to stop him and bring order back to the once peaceful planet.
A pretty interesting tidbit of information is the fact that in the instruction manual, Amy is actually referred to as Princess Sally. That's right, that Princess Sally from the Sad AM cartoon. Now granted, both of them came out in 1993, so maybe they tried to bridge between the two together so they coincide with each other, but this is still a weird mistake since Sally was never part of the games to begin with.
Oh yeah, this game marks the first appearance of Amy Rose. And I know that many people don't like Amy, but I find her one of the better Sonic characters out there, mostly because she has a distinct personality that is different than the rest of the cast. Plus, that moment that her 2D sprite is actually hugging Sonic is kind of adorable. It tugs on my heartstrings, which is why the game gives you an incentive to save her after the kidnapping by a metallic rival.
This is also the first time we're introduced to Metal Sonic. And unlike what I said in my Sonic 2 video, this is the real Metal Sonic, not Mecha Sonic or Silver Sonic. This is the real Metal Sonic.
And while I am playing the HD version of the intro, even on the Sega CD this intro was really impressive at the time, albeit choppy. Needless to say that both the opening and endings animations look absolutely fantastic. Not only that they are fast and colorful, but it also shows a very playful side of Sonic when he beats his enemies, which is really fun to watch. Those scenes were animated by both Studio Junio, which I don't really know much about, but also Toei Animation, a famous anime studio that gave us so many classics, yet even they don't have a perfect track record.
At first glance, Sonic CD doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. Graphically, it looks pretty similar to Sonic 1, especially with its sprite work, and the structure is also very similar, having 2 levels and then the third one being a boss fight. But when you start looking into its rudimentary design, there are a lot of cool nuances that start showing up pretty early.
But before I'm showering this game with countless compliments, let's talk about the spin dash. Not only that it looks different than in Sonic 2, but the spin dash also has to be charged completely to be executed successfully. If not, Sonic just reverts back to his standing position without moving at all. And that was probably done to make way to the new Super Peel-Out move. By pressing up instead of down, Sonic's legs will spin in a figure 8 so you can now perform the new dash move. And while it is more immediate than the spin dash, it does leave Sonic vulnerable since he's not curled up into a ball. But despite the fact it might not be the most practical move, it's just very cool to see the Sonic 1 sprite just move like this. Which leads me into one of the best qualities of Sonic CD, it's an absolutely gorgeous game. Thanks to the much increased color palette for one. But the Sega CD also managed to add some technical features that the Sega Genesis did not have, such as rotation and scaling, making it a bit more equal to the Super Nintendo. Plus, the game wins you over by just including this ramp right here, and that's within the first 10 seconds. And this is usually the point that in a Sonic review, I pretty much talk about each individual level, but I would just like to point out that I like pretty much all the levels equally. And yes, by that I also mean Wacky Workbench, which I know what some people say that the bouncy floor is annoying, but it is actually kind of refreshing that you have to stay as low as possible while trying to avoid the magnetic floor by jumping from one platform to another. This is once again reinforcing that Sonic is first and foremost a platformer. While the speed is the motif, the platforming is its essence. It's also kinda cute that just like Sonic 3D Blast, the levels' names are alliterations. So in other words, the first and second words have the same exact first letter. But really, Collision Chaos? Is that the best that your creative juices can come up with? What about Bumper Bass? At least it fits better to the freaking level. But perhaps the greatest thing about Sonic CD is its central mechanic of time travel. Throughout each level, there is a signpost with either past or future on it. If Sonic travels fast enough without losing any momentum, he'll be able to break the speed of the time and go to the desired temporal destination. So in addition to the present, each level also has a past and a future version. But not only that each time period is aesthetically different, but also the locations of item boxes or other objects is different as well, making each time period feel unique. Plus, the game gets extra points for just that sound effect when you spin a signpost. It just makes me also very giddy! When you go to the past, it shows the level's primordial condition before Ekbotnik sent his forces to claim the planet. Often the levels will look primitive and covered with plenty of flora and fauna.
But there are also a lot of clever touches in Sonic CD's past levels. Wacky Workbench, for example, is actually taking place at an exterior area instead of the interior area of the present level, and actually shows a lot of construction machinery and a mountainous area, kind of giving a cool little backstory to how the level was built in the first place. In addition, titled Tempest Pass level has a much lower tide for the water compared to the present, which again proves of how clever and nuanced Sonic CD really is.
But to further expand on how brilliant this game truly is, there are actually two different future paths, bad and good. Automatically, the game will take you to the bad future path, where Ekbotnik has successfully completed his world domination. Levels will look more decrepit with a much harsher and dull color palette, in addition to having more obstacles in the way. On the other hand, the good future shows how Sonic thwarted the Doctor's schemes. The levels are far more striking and colorful, and there are far less enemies to pose a threat. While it may be a fault of the game that the good future is significantly easier than its grim counterpart, it's more of a reward for liberating the zone from its tyrannical rule and basking in how your efforts actually paid off.
Then you must be asking yourself, how can I make a better future? Boy, that sounded a lot more profound than I thought it would be, but nevertheless, there are actually two different methods of getting the good ending in this game. The first one is definitely unorthodox since it involves a lot more exploration, but that definitely what makes Sonic CD such a unique game, especially compared to its brethren.
Hidden in each of the first two acts is a robot generator that Ekbotnik has placed. But when you're in the present, you realize you cannot destroy it since it's somewhat integrated to the environment. I don't really understand that. But the point of the matter is that you have to travel back to the past in order to destroy it. Doing so will guarantee the good future in that specific act. Furthermore, in order to get the best ending, you have to destroy every single generator in every act. Though some of the locations can be rather, less conspicuous. And to clarify, this is not mandatory, as you can still play the game like any other Sonic game and just blast through the levels. But it's nice that there's an option. You don't have to destroy all the generators, but there's a cool reward if you do so. What makes this more challenging is that if Sonic gathers enough speed to cause the time sign at the bottom left to flash, and then the momentum ends all of a sudden, not only the time travel will be interrupted, but another signpost must be sought after. And while some might consider this as a negative, I think it's kind of a game within a game, or in much more fancier terms, meta. The goal of finding the best area to time travel, whether it's between two springs or a very long slope, is a method of exploration on its own right. It is exhilarating to keep that momentum going, and when you finally pull off a time travel, it's really satisfying. And despite the vastness of the levels, they're pretty easy to backtrack, although don't be surprised if you get lost at times.
The second method of getting the good ending in the game is far more conventional. All you gotta do is just collect more than 50 rings and jump to the giant ring at the end of the level, which is very similar to Sonic 1. But the special stages in Sonic CD are anything but conventional.
The goal is to destroy all the UFOs before the timer runs out to secure the time stone. It's simple in theory, but the UFOs constantly move, and it's also pretty difficult judging exactly the perspective of where you need to jump to, meaning there's quite a bit of a learning curve. Not to mention that touching the water will cause the timer to plummet extremely fast. Success will grant Sonic a time stone, and if they're all collected, the good future as well as the best ending are automatically granted. And right off the bat, I gotta say, I do like the special stages a lot in Sonic CD. They are distinct, display the graphical capabilities of the Sega CD expertly, and present the unique control scheme without straying away from what has been learned throughout the game. They are definitely challenging, but they're also far from impossible. The bosses in the game are also extremely unique, often revolving around a gimmick instead of hitting Ekbotnik 8 times. For example, the one in Quartz Quadrant revolving around running the conveyor belt to make Ekbotnik's platform turn into a molten mass, so it becomes more of a war of attrition than an actual jumping match.
One of the only negatives I have to say about the game is that the final boss is unbelievably lame. It's very easy to dodge his attacks, and the design is just completely uninspired. I'm actually gonna go off and say, it's probably one of the worst final bosses of any Sonic game ever. And I'm including the 3D ones there too.
However, the most iconic boss fight is by far the one in Stardust Speedway, when you finally face off against Metal Sonic in a one-on-one race while the Ekbotnik spams a one-hit kill laser, which makes one wonder why he hasn't used this more often. Not only it's one of the most challenging bosses in any Sonic game, but it also feels very fulfilling to outwit the Metallic Faker and finally saving Amy, something that Sonic might regret later on. All of this is accompanied by some amazing music.
Speaking of which, I've dragged this long enough, so let's address the soundtrack issue. Sonic CD, as a matter of fact, has two different soundtracks. One for Japan and Europe, and the other for the US. There is no clear reason as to why this happened, as some say that Sega of America did not like the Japanese soundtrack for being too poppy and cheery and having jazz elements to it, and opted to use something a bit more atmospheric. But either way, we have two different soundtracks with two different mindsets. But what's really interesting is that the past tracks left completely untouched, and there's a pretty good reason for that.
The past music track was actually encoded directly to the game's code itself as a PCM audio track, whereas the rest of the soundtrack was just recorded as a regular CD audio that was easily to change, unlike the actual code, so therefore the past music was left intact in the US version. It is a nice touch that the past music doesn't feel as polished as the rest of the soundtrack, giving it a bit of a more ancient feel. However, since those tracks were composed in Japan, they clash with the US soundtrack since they are tonally different. Now, in theory, it would be nice to compare the two.
Did somebody say compare?
God, no.
I'm Nintendo.
And I'm Sega.
This is Console War!
No, stop. Guys, what are you even doing here?
We heard you're having a comparison.
So we decided to drop by uninvited. I brought some beers. He brought some beers. Beer? Beer.
Guys, I'm just talking about the two soundtracks of Sonic CD. It's not even a Nintendo game.
Oh, right. But I'm pretty sure Nintendo will win regardless.
It's not even a Nintendo! Guys, I'm sorry. It's just, this is not the perfect time right now. I promise I'll call you when I do need you, but it's just not the right time. I'm sorry.
That's alright. We understand.
But what are we gonna compare now?
Oh yeah, I never thought about that.
I don't know, how about best start button on a controller?
Well, everybody knows that the start button's better on the Sega Genesis controller, cause it's right above the trigger button.
No, everyone knows the Super Nintendo's better start button because it's nice and soft.
Yeah, you'd need a soft button for your girly hands. I like it hard. I mean, check this action out. You can't get that kind of speed with a soft...
I'm pretty sure this is gonna hold them off for a while. Anyway, back to the review.
Like I said earlier, it would take me another video to talk about this soundtrack, but that being said, I believe both soundtracks do their job really well. The Japanese soundtrack came from the composers of Sonic 2 for the Game Gear. And it's pretty awesome that they used one of their original tracks as the main theme song of this game, Toot Toot Sonic Warrior.
Toot Toot Sonic Warrior, be the system time. Toot Toot Sonic Warrior, flavor in your mind.
It's goofy, but I won't take this game without it. But in addition, I will definitely say that this soundtrack sounds more poppy, upbeat, has a faster tempo that I personally gravitate more towards. The US soundtrack was composed by Spencer Nielsen, and I believe there was more emphasis on creating an atmosphere, or pretty much using more ambience pieces than creating catchy melodies for the most part. Sure, there are some exceptions to both soundtracks, but as a whole, both deserve a listen purely for distinctiveness. Sonic CD was also the very first Sonic game to ever introduce a save system by saving your game progress to the RAM of the Sega CD itself. It also has a bunch of cool extras, like when you finish the game you get a time attack mode, and if you beat the desired time, you get an interesting sound test in which if you input the codes correctly, you get a cool screenshot. And some that are just, I can't with fire! The game also had numerous amount of ports. The first one came out on the PC, and surprisingly had much slower load times than the original version.
The next version was probably more familiar to people on Sonic Gems Collection, which came out on the GameCube in the US and everywhere else on the PS2. In fact, Sonic CD was its main attraction. Now, while the port is pretty good all things considered, there are some flaws. Specifically in Title Tempo Zone, where the color of the water is always transparent regardless of the time zone. Now, I have no idea why that is, but it does take away from the game's look. However, this is not even the best port of the game.
In 2011, an HD port was released by one Christian Whitehead and his team. And I won't beat around the bush, this port is amazing in every conceivable way. The game is fully widescreen, the physics and collision detection issues have been completely fixed, the classic spin dash has been added, and even the special stages have better controls and run with a smoother frame rate. And another excellent feature, especially for purists, is the ability to play this game with either US or Japanese soundtracks, finally ending the quarrel between the two camps. Lastly, what might be the coolest bonus, you get to play as Tails. Considering how big vertically the levels are, it's actually pretty cool to use Tails' flight capabilities to more easily explore seemingly unreachable areas of the levels. I mean, frankly, I can gush over and over about this game, but at this point we should probably move on to the final cut. Whoa, wait a second, that's the wrong Sonic CD jingle. Of all the games to get the wrong Final Cut theme, this is not the episode. Play the right one. Thank you. On the positive side, this game boasts fantastic visual. Definitely one of the best looking games on the Sega CD, and even 16-bit in general. The time mechanic is unbelievably unique and makes the game stand out. Both soundtracks, yes, both of them, are really good and worth a listen. And last but certainly not least, I think the bosses are some of the best in 2D Sonic history. On the negative side, again, it's pretty hard for me to nitpick, but I don't like the game's spin dash, even though that is fixed in the HD port. And like I said earlier, the final boss sucks. Big time.
Make no mistake, guys, Sonic CD is an absolutely fantastic game. From the fast gameplay that has some exploration elements in it, to the great graphics that use the capability of the Sega CD, to the catchy soundtrack regardless of what region you're from, this game is an absolute must-play. It is one of the cheapest Sega CD games out there, but more importantly, now you can own this game on HD consoles and mobile devices for less than $5. If you haven't played this game yet, I implore you. It's in my top 10 Sonic games for a reason, and I highly recommend it. Check it out. But you know something, guys? I just thought of something. Wouldn't it be cool to go back to the past just like Sonic can? I know I would use it to fix many of my past mistakes, but you know, honestly, there is one reason why I'll never want to visit my past ever again. I'll see you next time, guys. Take care. Leave me alone!
Thank you once again for watching the video, guys, and I'm really sorry for the delay, but this was a pretty beefy video, so I hope you enjoyed it. Special thanks to my friends at Console Wars, and I highly recommend check out their channel. I even starred in a guest episode of Tiny Toon you should all watch, just saying. Please support the channel by liking, subscribing, and look forward to the next video. I'll see you next time, guys. Take care.
Well, everybody knows that the start button's better on the Sega controller, because it's right above the trigger control. You got something to say? You got a rebuttal, sir?
You win.
Boom!